Hey everyone, my name's Jessie. Welcome back to my channel. Today I am doing my June wrap-up, and in the month of June I participated in the Olympics readathon that was taking place over in the Shelf Space Discord server that I will link down below if you're interested in joining the Shelf Space book club community. It's a great place to be. So the Olympics readathon was a competitive readathon. I was the team captain for Team EOS, and even though we didn't win, it was still such a blast, and I ended up reading so much more than I ever thought I could have gotten to in the month of June. So I have 8 books to talk about and 1 DNF. Let's go in the order of least favorite to favorite. So I'll start with the DNF, and that is More Than This by Patrick Ness, which I'm pretty surprised that I ended up DNFing this book. Patrick Ness was one of my auto-buy authors after finishing the Chaos Walking trilogy by him, which is one of my favorite YA sci-fi fantasy series of all time. It's fantastic. I highly recommend you go read it if you haven't already. More Than This, though, is a contemporary YA book that follows a main character who dies and is kind of stuck in this limbo state, and you're trying to figure out why he's in this limbo state and how to get out of it. And what I found was I just was not connecting at all to any of the characters that we were following. I actually found them pretty unlikable, and I really didn't like the plot. Just the overall state of limbo that the character was in was so mundane and boring to me, which was so surprising. I'm shocked that I didn't end up liking this. So I did DNF it around page like 150. A lot of people love this book, so maybe give it a go if that sounds interesting to you. But the problem was when he was in limbo, it was a whole bunch of like just exploring things and talking about like things that were around him. There weren't any people that he was interacting with. There's just him alone in this place, and he was explaining to you what it looked like for like over 100 pages. It was so boring. Oh my god. So I did DNF this one, and probably won't be going back to it. Just wasn't my thing. So this is actually the second Patrick Ness book that I've DNF'd. I also DNF'd Burn by Patrick Ness. So I'm starting to think that his like YA contemporary books are just not for me, and I should start just focusing on like any fantasy or sci-fi releases he has. So yeah, pretty bummed about that one. And then for all the books I did complete now, the least favorite I think for the month was Heart of Flames by Nicki Pau-Preto, which was the second book in the Crown of Feathers series. And Crown of Feathers I liked, I didn't love. I found it pretty interesting world building. It follows these characters who have like these phoenixes that they ride, and it's a land where these phoenix riders have kind of disappeared from the world, and they're recovering from a war. And so the main character is a phoenix rider herself and is trying to kind of bring these phoenix riders back. And I liked it. The characters for me were kind of the weakest part of the first book, and unfortunately that kind of continued into the second book for me. I really didn't find myself getting any more connected to the characters. I didn't find myself really rooting or just caring about any of the characters, and honestly, if it wasn't for this readathon, I probably would have DNF'd this one as well. But I had gotten so far in the audiobook and had listened to like 14 hours of this audiobook and was like, I'm not DNFing this because then it doesn't count for any points. So I managed to finish it, but it was just really long for what it was. It was a lot of, I felt like, filler plot, and I just wasn't a fan. I just really didn't care about the majority of things that were happening in this book, and just found myself really not caring about the characters, unfortunately. So yeah, I won't be continuing on with this series. It's not bad by any means. I actually think that like this is very good YA fantasy. It just feels a little too familiar to me. After having read so many other YA fantasy books, it just wasn't for me. I felt like it was very middle of the pack for YA fantasy, so that's why I won't be continuing. The next book I have to talk about is A Vow So Bold and Deadly by Brigid Kemmerer, which is the third and final book in the Cursebreakers trilogy. And overall, I thought that the first book in this trilogy was by far the best book. It was so much fun following Harper and Ren and those two with their romance and Harper's kind of out of world experience in this fantasy land coming from our world, I thought was so much fun. And unfortunately, the second book and the third book, they just weren't as fun. They lost a lot of like that humor that the first book had, and we had a lot of focus on some of the other characters that I just didn't care as much about. We do get Harper and Ren's perspectives in this book again, which I really enjoyed. I truly wish this whole trilogy had just been from those two perspectives. And I feel like that might be an unpopular opinion because I've seen a lot of people love the other perspectives in this book. I didn't love them as much. So I just really wanted Harper and Ren's story, and those were definitely the most interesting parts of this book. I do think it was really interesting, like what this author did do with this trilogy and how she structured it. I thought was really unique and something I hadn't seen in a YA fantasy before, where the first book you have two point of views that you're following, the second book is two different point of views, and they're kind of on opposite sides of this war that's starting to kind of come to the forefront of this world, and then you have to kind of choose a side in this third book, and it's really interesting how she did this. So I actually really liked that structure. It's not that that was bad, it's just not my personal preference, but it was very unique, and I'm really glad that I finished off this trilogy. This one was definitely more enjoyable for me than the second one, so I would definitely rank the first one as the best, and then this one second. The next book I have is Raybearer by Jordan Ifueko, which is the first book in, I think it's the Raybearer series. It follows a character named Tari Sai, who is kind of this outcast in the beginning of the book and is tasked with this mission to go and compete in these trials to become a council member of the Crown Prince. And she is tasked with doing this because she is supposed to get close to the Crown Prince so that she can kill him. And it was really fascinating seeing how she was wrestling with these emotions in her head and these conflicting feelings, and the magic was really interesting in this book, but the world building was by far the best part of this book. The characters and their relationships I thought were really well done. I really liked the friendships in this book. For me, why this wasn't maybe a new favorite was because just the plot. It felt like it was very dragged out. At times I was like, where are we going with this? What are we doing here? And so for that reason, it's not a new favorite, but I really liked the world building. Well, I haven't decided if I'm going to be continuing on with this series or not. It's just completely subjective preference for the direction this plot took. The synopsis of this book definitely only shows a very small portion of what this book actually is about. So I liked this one. I didn't love it, but I do recommend reading it because of the amazing world building and the relationships between the characters. I really liked. Hi. High five? Yeah, there it is. Hi. All right, the next book I have to talk about is Ring Shout by Djeli Clark. So this is a short novella that takes place in 1912, I believe, 1915, and it follows this alternate kind of fantastical history of the Ku Klux Klan and how the KKK members are actual monsters and demons that are hunted by these demon slayers in this book. And it is a really cool and unique story that was really well written. I really enjoyed this one. I'm so impressed with how much was packed into such a short amount of time with this one. The characters and their relationships with each other were so well realized. The just mythos and the themes explored in this book were so fascinating. So I am super glad that this was so highly recommended by so many people because it was really, really good. I highly recommend checking this one out. It seriously packs a punch, and the characters were so cool. I loved the characters in this book. I wish there was even more. Like, I'm so sad that this is all we get of like this world and this idea. Maybe the author will continue to write in this kind of series. That would be awesome if he made this a series, because I would love to read more from this world and get even more of these characters' stories. And that's always kind of my biggest bummer with novellas, is I just always end up wanting more, which was definitely the case with this book, which I think is a good thing. I think if the author leaves you wanting more, then that is a fantastic thing. So highly recommend this one. I really enjoyed it. The next one I have to talk about is Upon a Burning Throne by Ashok K. Banker, which was the buddy read for Elle and I for the month of May. So I just now finished it in June, and oh my god, this was so good. I was shocked at how much I really ended up enjoying this, and I think it was because my expectations were so low because of the Goodreads rating. Goodreads rating for this book is not very good, and I don't know why. This was so good. The writing in this book is beautiful. It's very lyrical. It feels very much like a fairy tale. Like I'm reading a fairy tale and kind of observing these characters at a distance, if that makes sense. And you follow a bunch of different characters in this book. It's about this empire where the heir to this burning throne is selected through this very formal process. And it ends up being, in the beginning of the book, we find out that these two boys who were born around the same time to the same family are both heirs to this burning throne, and so it kind of follows their lives in this very epic fantasy tale. It follows how they rule. It shows kind of this emerging evil that's after their throne and the war to take their throne back. It's just really, really good. I loved this. I loved the characters. I was so fascinated by the plot and the politics of this book. I thought the world was so well realized. I loved the world in this book. I just loved escaping into this lush Indian-inspired world. It was beautiful. I can see why a lot of people wouldn't like this. It's very slow burn, so it takes a long time to kind of build up the character stories, and you go on a lot of different like side tangents, and it is very chunky. So it's obvious that a lot of people didn't connect to this one as much because of the pace of this book. It definitely doesn't have like this singular plot that's driving it forward. It definitely follows kind of just these characters' lives throughout multiple years. And so if you don't like those kinds of character studies in books, then you may not connect to this one as much. It's definitely more character driven than plot driven, because it feels like it meanders at times. So I can definitely see why people wouldn't like it, but still, the writing, the world, the magic, the characters themselves, I thought were all really well done. So I can't wait to continue on with this story. It's super unique, very unlike anything I've ever read before, and I am so glad that I ended up reading this one. A big shout out to StarlahReads, who is the one that put this on my radar. She's the only one I've seen talk about this on BookTube. I'm going to link her channel down below. She loved this book as well. So huge shout out to her for putting this on my radar. I'm so glad that she did, because I really ended up enjoying it. The next book I have is Firekeeper's Daughter by Angeline Boulley, and this is a YA thriller that follows a young girl who lives on the Ojibwe reservation and is tied up in this mystery to kind of figure out who in her community is selling this specific drug, and is very much a character-driven story that explores a lot of really beautiful themes and has so much lush cultural detail. I really loved this one. I thought that the writing in this book was spectacular. I loved the pacing of the novel. It is quite large for being a YA thriller, and I really appreciated the extra length because it provided so much more cultural detail. It really made you get lost in this story and these characters' lives, and I loved the relationships between all the different characters. The main character, Donis, is fantastic. Definitely a top tier protagonist in any YA book I've read. I thought she was brave. I thought she was very, very intelligent and mature for her age. I loved seeing her piece together this puzzle in this book and figure out this mystery. It was so good. So I loved this book. I'm so glad that I read it. I highly recommend this one. If this author ever does write anything else, I will definitely be checking it out. The next book I have to talk about is Fireborne by Rosaria Munda, which came highly recommended from my good friend Elle over at Elliot Brooks. Channel's linked down below. If you have been following her channel, you will know she loves this book. She loves Fireborne. So I definitely wanted to read this one because of her recommendation, and a lot of my friends have ended up reading this. I know Alan over at the Library of Alexandria read this and loved it. I know Jade from Bedtime Bookworm read this and loved it. So I definitely wanted to check it out. I'm so glad I did because I also loved it. I thought it was fantastic. I loved the two characters, Annie and Lee, in this book. It follows those two characters' perspectives as they grapple with the aftermath of this war that tore their country apart, and they are coming to terms with this new regime that's taken over the country. And it kind of grapples with these themes of, is the new regime any better than the old one? Even with the best intentions, is this the right way to rule? It's really, really fascinating stuff. The politics in this book were so well realized. That was one of my favorite things about this book. I love political intrigue in my fantasy books. This one delivered so well with the politics. I loved following the politics of this world. Annie is definitely a standout character for me. I loved her in this book. I thought she was extremely mature for her age, very, very intelligent, very brave, kind of like Donis from Firekeeper's Daughter. She was fantastic as one of our main protagonists. Lee, I liked him a lot as well, but Annie for me was the standout character. Loved exploring these characters' past and how they've had to handle past traumas and kind of overcoming those hardships. It focused a lot on that, and I really appreciated seeing that. Overall, this for me read definitely on the more mature end of the young adult genre. It felt like it could, if it wanted to, be categorized as adult and get away with it for sure. I thought that this just, for me, the characters felt more mature. The world building was really well done and really intricate and complex. So I loved this. I'm super glad I read it. I'm very glad that Elle recommended it because I don't know if I would have picked it up as quickly if she hadn't. So thanks, Elle, for the recommendation. Super glad I loved it. And then finally, I have my favorite read, I think, of the month, which was Shadow of the Fox by Djeli Kagawa. And the reason I love this so much is I think because it's a Japanese-inspired fantasy, young adult, and it follows this kitsune character named Yumeko, and it follows this mysterious samurai named Tatsumi, and it kind of pairs up these two very, very polar opposite characters together to go on a quest for a mysterious scroll that could essentially change the world. I loved this story. I loved the two main characters so much. Yumeko was definitely a perfect character for me. She was very innocent, very naive, very playful. I loved her. And then Tatsumi, I love that trope for male protagonists of like brooding, mysterious characters, and that's exactly what he was. And I loved the dynamics between Yumeko and Tatsumi. I just thought this was a ton of fun. I loved all of the Japanese-inspired lore in this book, and it definitely made me feel very nostalgic for my times back living in Japan. So I think that that's why I loved it as much as I did. So I might be a little biased because I did used to live in Japan, and I just love that place so much. I miss it so much. This one for me was just such a comfort read. Every time I would pick it up, I would smile. It would just bring me back to my days in Japan. So I loved it. I can't wait to continue on with the series. The quest itself was a ton of fun, and the ending was wild. Oh my god, I'm so scared for that ending and what the next book has in store. I'm just terrified. I hope that our characters are going to be okay, because I care a lot. So very excited that I loved this as much as I did, and will be happily continuing on with this series. So those are all of the books I read in the month of June. Did you see any that you've read, and what did you think of them? Definitely leave those comments down below. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, make sure to give it a thumbs up, subscribe if you'd like to, and I will see you all in my next one. Bye!